The Chronicles of Narnia is getting a reboot on Netflix, but there's a more interesting way to revisit the story than with another remake, by turning it into a horror project. C.S. Lewis's Narnia books have been adapted before, though Disney's iteration of the story was cut short after Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Greta Gerwig's Narnia remake seeks to bring the fantasy story to the screen once again, though it's not clear what the two movies Gerwig is confirmed for will cover. Rumors suggest that a Narnia prequel is being made, which means we'll see the magician's nephew brought to the silver screen at long last. It's possible Netflix will want to cover the whole story after Gerwig's confirmed movies, but it's a shame no studio is taking a bigger risk with Narnia. While the original fantasy narrative is a beloved classic, it'd be interesting to see a more bonkers approach to Lewis's tales. With so many children's stories being turned into horror movies, one has to wonder what that could look like for the Chronicles of Narnia. 7. A new take on Narnia would be more exciting than rehashing the books again. A fresh perspective would be more interesting. The book covers of The Last Battle, The Magician's Nephew, and Prince Caspian, The Return to Narnia, from the Chronicles of Narnia series by C.S. Lewis, custom image by Yida Chacon. Although the prospect of seeing the Chronicles of Narnia adapted in full is exciting, most fans of Lewis's series know what's coming, and they've seen several of the books brought to the screen already. While the handful of Narnia books that haven't been adapted will feel fresh and interesting, remaking stories like The Lion, The Witch, and The Wardrobe could feel repetitive if not handled correctly. Fortunately, Gerwig tackling the magician's nephew offers hope that she's trying to keep things fresh. But a more off-the-rails approach would surprise even fans of the books. Twisting the Chronicles of Narnia into a horror adaptation would offer a totally fresh and revamped take on the story, as the possibilities are nearly endless. Such a work wouldn't have to stick as closely to the source material, as it would be a reimagining rather than a proper adaptation. A wholly unique perspective like this could accomplish things that straightforward adaptations of the book are unable to. It could also keep even the most seasoned Narnia fans guessing throughout its run. 6. Narnia's fairy tale elements lend themselves well to a horror adaptation. The whimsy could easily be twisted into something sinister. The whimsy of fairy tales can easily be twisted into horror, and that would work in the Chronicles of Narnia's favor. There are so many elements of Narnia's setting that could be turned into something sinister without much work. Creatures like Mr. Tumnus could be depicted as grotesque rather than cute and charming, and the iconic lamppost could be touted as a darker symbol of home. It could represent the hope of escape rather than something warmer and more innocent. Meanwhile, the wardrobe could quite literally represent monsters lurking in the closet. Warping the childlike wonder and innocence of Narnia would be very doable, as so many fairy tales have darker iterations, and many horror fantasy movies lean heavily on fairy tale imagery. With the Chronicles of Narnia already having those elements in place, it wouldn't be a huge jump to put more disturbing spins on them. Narnia's story already has details that could be perceived as subtly dark, so it would only be a matter of making those more overt. The White Witch would make a great horror villain. Jadis could be even more terrifying. The White Witch is already a fierce and intimidating villain in the Chronicles of Narnia, and she could easily fall into a similar role in a horror movie. Jadis is incredibly unsettling from her first appearance in The Lion, The Witch, and The Wardrobe, and that could be ramped up significantly in a horror adaptation. Jadis' initial encounter with Edmund is eerie and suspenseful at face value, and the enchantment of the Turkish delight could be made more extreme and disturbing, leaning into the gluttony of the moment. Jadis' goals could also be spun for a horror movie, as she wants to corrupt the Pevensey children, reign over Narnia, and obtain immortality, all things that could be exaggerated into even more horrific ends. Given that the White Witch is Lewis's embodiment of evil, it wouldn't be a huge jump to make her a full-blown horror villain. This is where a horror Narnia project could lean into the author's religious themes as well, using concepts like the devil to make Jadis even more terrifying. 4. A horror adaptation could explore parts of Narnia that the books gloss over. It's the perfect medium to address certain details. A horror take on the Chronicles of Narnia could finally explore parts of the story the books and movies gloss over, like how the children handle the transition to and from Narnia. It's a bit odd that the Pevensies don't have more issues with growing into adulthood in Narnia, then returning to their child states in the real world. Lewis likely had no interest in exploring the potential fallout of that, as it would have detracted from the messages and stories he wanted to cover. However, horror is the perfect medium to explore this intriguing detail of the original story. Likewise, a horror adaptation could unpack one of the biggest problems with Narnia's ending, Susan Pevensey's fate. The morality of the books can be black and white at times, and Susan's ending has been criticized as being sexist. She's left behind after discovering her femininity, and a horror medium could look at this through a more critical eye. Even the other Pevensies' endings could be explored from this angle, as their deaths at the end of the Chronicles of Narnia are jarring enough to warrant a second look. they wouldn't feel so out of place in a horror story.